The Day the World Forgot Its Heroes. This is the full movie story of the newest high-action movie, The Impossible Legacy, The Final Echo. A tale of shadows and sacrifice, of a hero history erased, and the silence that became a weapon. There are wars no nation ever confesses, battles fought in dark corridors of power, recorded in classified languages, and deleted before sunrise. The world believes peace is natural. It never sees the architects who trade their names to preserve it. Among those ghosts was Ethan Ward, portrayed by the legendary actor Tom Cruise, the world's most decorated covert operative, a man whose life existed between intelligence and myth. Years ago, Ward vanished beneath a storm of betrayal. Files were closed, graves sealed, medals forgotten. But legends do not die. They hibernate beneath the noise, waiting for the world to need them again. When an encrypted signal awakens an old code named Final Echo, the silence fractures, hidden alliances tremble, satellites stutter, and the old machinery of truth begins to turn. Somewhere between memory and machine, Ward's name flickers back into the system, not as a ghost, but as an algorithm rewritten by guilt. The story that unfolds is not about one man's survival. It is about a civilization trying to remember who protected it while it slept. Every secret, every sacrifice, every erased confession returns, demanding to be heard. The myth of Ethan Ward becomes the mirror through which the world rediscovers its own buried conscience. In this reborn conflict of light and silence, those who once hunted him now hunt the idea of him, a symbol that refuses to disappear. The truth that buried its heroes has found a voice, and it speaks in the language of consequence. From the ruins of deception rises a pulse that cannot be contained, carried by the wind, encoded in the bones of those who still believe. This is not the beginning of a mission. It is the awakening of everything that was meant to stay forgotten. The day the world forgot its heroes was the day it began writing their return. KOOL VADZ presents The Impossible Legacy, the final echo stories that never die. They evolve into legends. The silent wake rain needles the marble of an unmarked grave. A line of nameless tombs gleams beneath floodlights that hum like broken radios. Among them stands Florence Pugh as Clara Voss, her face half hidden by a black veil, her silence heavier than any prayer. The coffin descending into wet soil carries the ashes of myth. The man the files called Ethan Ward, once portrayed across the agency corridors by stories too dangerous to archive. He was the unstoppable force, the one legends now picture through the aura of Tom Cruise. Ethan Ward, the field commander who saved nations, then vanished mid-mission in the Baltic storm. Nobody was recovered. Only a shredded signal, half a sentence. If you're hearing this, they found us. And static. The word wrote him off. Idris Elba as Director Kane, the mentor who built him, closed the file with bureaucratic calm. Yet grief has a sound. It arrives as a voice the rain cannot drown. That night, in a high-rise apartment in Berlin, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, lays a cracked military wristwatch on her desk. The engraving inside reads EW. When she presses the side latch, the second's hand stops. The lamp flickers, and the voice of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, breathes through her speaker. If you're rehearing this, I failed, but the truth is buried beneath the noise. Trust no one, not even me. The analog pulse hides coordinates. Prague, Old Town, a decommissioned embassy. The ghost has left her a trail. Fog thickens over Prague like an unspoken warning. At 2:14 a.m., she slips through a collapsed stairwell into the embassy ruins. The air tastes of dust and wire. On a cracked wall glows the old insignia, a circle inside a triangle, the secret mark of Operation Echo. In a rusted locker, a drive, a faded photograph, a single bullet casing, etched with impossible coordinates. The photograph arrests her breath. Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, smiling beside Idris Elba, Director Kane, and two shadowed agents. Before realization hardens, motion sensors blink red. A figure enters civilian coat. Assassin's posture. He kneels to the locker, whispers rush into the steel, and a bullet from the skylight deletes him from existence. Dust falls. The drone that fired fades into mist. On the dead man's wrist, a subdermal chip beats the same frequency as Ethan's watch. The message reached her. Someone killed to intercept it. Back in her hotel room, code bleeds across her monitor. Two sentences surface from the chip's encryption. Legacy is alive. Protect the key. Beneath them, a name, Pedro Pascal, a Silas Roe, A ghost operative branded terminated 7 years ago under Kane's own authority. As she decrypts, her system locks. Access revoked. Someone inside Axiom has marked her as contaminated. She floods the hardware with solvent, grabs the drive, and steps out as a tactical unit enters the lobby below. A single message flashes on her phone. Run. They know. She doesn't hesitate. She becomes absence. Across the rooftops of Prague, drones sweep like metallic vultures. In her ear, a voice returns. Precise, calm. The voice of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, guiding her through the storm. Left turn. 2 blocks. Sewer grate. She obeys, vanishing beneath the street into tunnels that remember older wars. Chalk symbols lead her through darkness. Triangle within circle, repeated like prayer. In the final chamber, ancient monitors wake. Light gathers into a shape, the digital ghost of Ethan Ward, his eyes carved from static, his voice steady. Legacy isn't a file. It's a seed, a record of every agent who ever lived in shadow. Someone is selling it. If Legacy falls, the world will end quietly. Coordinates burn into the screen. Northern Archives, then. You're the last one I trust. Static swallows him, leaving her heartbeat as the only sound. By dawn, she's on a northbound train, windows glossed with frost. Each station blurs behind her. Every reflection could be a camera. The Northern Archives rise from ice, a fortress of data and secrecy. Inside, fluorescent silence. A forged badge blinks green. Behind door C19 sleeps a carbon fiber sleeve marked with the circle triangle. Inside, a composite shard, warm as skin. She inserts it into a reader. Screens awaken. Names unfurl in constellations. Living dead, erased. Legacy is no database. It is humanity's shadow rendered visible. Access logs crawl upward until one name repeats like a confession. Idris Elba, Director Kane. 12 unauthorized entries in 30 days before the Baltic failure. And another last night. No innocence can breathe inside that pattern. Alarms stretch. Remembering how to scream, she withdraws the shard, resets traces, escapes through maintenance shafts before security grows a face. Outside, snow edits her footprints. Down the slope, a convoy waits 3 men, certain of their orders. Certainty dies fast. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss teaches the snow how to swallow noise. 15 minutes later, the mountain holds only silence. And she holds the key. At dusk, a rural airstrip hums beneath a pewter sky. A hangar masquerading as a barn shelters a narrow-body aircraft engines, whispering impatience. Workers move with practiced indifference. A black SUV stops at the perimeter. The door opens. Idris Elba. Director Kane steps out, trench coat absorbing the wind. He checks a timepiece, watches a woman pass a violent case-sized container to 2 agents, and smiles the way storms do before they break. The plane lifts, taking its secret cargo into forbidden airspace. Kane turns away, unaware of the eyes tracking him through a scope that never fires. For now. Night folds a new city around a river and hides the moon. The watch on Florence Pugh, Clara Voss's wrist, ticks twice, a signal disguised as time. The pulse resolves into coordinates. A house with no number, a tree that should be dead. There waits Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe. Alive in ways death cannot measure, eyes carved with the fatigue of men who outlive their reasons. He opens the door before she knocks. Words would only slow the inevitable. The key hums between their palms. Like recognition, machines wake under the floorboards, whispering the code of legacy as holographic stars bloom in midair. 2 survivors, 1 secret, and a ghost still pulling strings from the dark. Above them, lightning paints the clouds white. Somewhere beyond the storm, Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward breathes, hidden yet alive, the architect of his own disappearance. And far below, Idris Elba, Director Kane, stares at his reflection, whispering orders that will decide who dies in silence next. The watch restarts, its ticking, a heartbeat disguised as destiny. The impossible legacy has awakened. The legacy protocol, the resurrection signal. Dawn has no color left to spare. Across the city of the river, Light seeps through fog like a confession, trying to stay secret. In the house with no number, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, begs to the quiet argument of machines beneath the floorboards. The key rests on the oak table, humming in its sleep. Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe stands by the window, eyes tracing a skyline already forgetting yesterday. Neither speaks. Between them, holographic constellations of data revolve, points of light naming agents, dead and undead, within the lattice of legacy. Each spark a life the world pretends not to owe. The air trembles once. The key changes rhythm. It has found a heartbeat somewhere beyond the map. A live signature identical to the one that belonged to Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward. For 5 years the world buried him. Now the patent says otherwise. The coordinates point northern Arctic relay once used to bounce encrypted traffic through abandoned satellites. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss memorizes them. Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe shuts down the projection. Silence folds back over the room like a closing file. Hours later, the two become rumors, moving through airports under false passports. Cameras record them as strangers. Algorithms forget them in the next frame. Over Scandinavia, the sky changes texture. Sunlight cracking through cirrus-like glass. The cargo plane that carries them belongs to no airline. Its manifest lists medical equipment and prayer. Inside, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, studies the northern coordinates again, tracing the latitude across a sea of white, where even truth gets lost in reflection. Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe, cleans a suppressed rifle with the affection of an artist restrung a violin. The cabin lights flicker to red. The pilot's voice never uses names. They jump before the ice remembers how to refuse. The Arctic receives them as intruders. Wind sharpens itself into blades. Beneath their boots, a crust of snow hides the bones of an abandoned relay station, half-buried domes, antennas like broken ribs. Inside, frost clings to steel consoles that have not breathed warm air since the century turned. Power hums faintly, fed by a reactor that refuses extinction. On a desk, a monitor glows with a single line of text. Board protocol active, awaiting authentication. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss slides the key into the port. The monitor blinks, coughs, and spills life across the walls. Footage, telemetry, mission logs, pieces of the day. Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, supposedly died. The feed shows him alive, wounded but deliberate, transmitting data before detonations erase the horizon. His final message had never ended. It was intercepted, rewritten, and buried by another authorization code, Canderactive Sigma. The traitor had not only closed the file, he had rewritten history itself. Wind rattles the dome, drawing its own applause. Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe, finds a rusted locker labeled Echo Team. Inside, sealed rations, 2 black drives, and a small transponder still blinking with half-life. When he touches it, the light steadies. A signal goes out into the polar sky, climbing invisible staircases toward satellites, long forgotten by accountants, but never by ghosts. Somewhere far south, Idris Elba Director Kane looks up from a secure boardroom and knows his past just exhaled. He orders a clean sweep operation. No paperwork, no trace. The directive: retrieve the key, erase the witnesses. Teams mobilize across 3 continents, while Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, still officially dead, monitors their movement through a labyrinth of repurposed satellites. His face, unshaven and drawn, flickers on a cracked terminal within the Arctic relay. For the first time since the Baltic, he sees her, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss's reflection, in his feed blur, younger than he remembers, carrying the same stubborn quiet that once made him choose her as apprentice. He hesitates to speak. Instead, he roots a coded pulse into the key, proof that he is real. The machine answers, like a heart recognizing its twin. Outside, snow lifts in spirals as a helicopter cuts through the clouds. Black rotors, no insignia. The enemy has found them faster than mathematics allows. Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe shoulders the rifle, breath frothing the scope. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss grabs the key, disconnects the power feed, pockets the drives. The first missiles strike the ridge. The world erupts in white thunder. She and Silas dive through a maintenance shaft as the dome caves. The key's hum becomes a scream, alive, furious, buried under snow and debris. The survivors crawl toward a fissure that leads back to night. Miles away, in a fortified glass tower rising above London's fog, Idris Elba, Director Kane watches satellite, feeds Bloom with static. He closes his eyes, feels the tremor of history slipping from his grip. A voice from the intercom reports loss of contact. Kane smiles, slow and private. Not lost. He murmurs to the silence, found by exactly the wrong person. Beneath the polar ice, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, presses a beacon into the snow and triggers the rescue code her mentor once invented for impossible exits. Over the horizon, the aurora ignites a green curtain tearing open the night. Somewhere behind that color, a signal rides the ionosphere straight into the secure frequency of a man who should not exist. The call sign reads, Ward 1 active, in a cabin buried by time. Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward opens his eyes. The Shadow Network night folds the Arctic into a single breath, and that breath crystallizes against stone. Beneath the crushed relay dome, a channel of black air threads through fractured ice. It carries frost, old cables, and the stubborn heat of two living bodies. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, moves first, shoulders narrowing, gloved hands measuring darkness by touch. Behind her, Pedro Pascal. Silas Roe drags a case that was never meant to be moved by human strength alone. The key rides inside Clara Voss's chest pocket, its low electric murmur syncing with her pulse until the difference between machine and heart ceases to matter. Above the fissure, rotor washabatters snow into a white frenzy. Such beams sweep the wreck, then pass on, deceived by the neat geometry of collapse. Predators prefer conclusions. The tunnel crawls east under the glacier. It empties into a sea cave, where waves slap stone with the repetitive patience of an interrogator who believes in time. Against the far wall, a rusted submersible squats on corroded skids, its steel skin tattooed by old missions and salt. Silas Roe wipes frost from a port, reads gauges that have not credited a human glance in years, and finds the one truth that still matters. The battery bank remembered how to hold charge. There is no conversation. There is only the work of making engines remember. Pumps wheeze, lights tremble. The old craft inhales brine and wakes. Clara Voss seals the hatch. The sub slips off the ledge and descends into a black that keeps its own counsel. In the narrow cockpit glow, Clara Voss angles the sonar toward the continental shelf and plots a course that chooses underwater canyons over speed. She watches the screen the way a surgeon watches a heart, finding rhythm in noise. Silas Roe cracks a sealed toolkit, swaps to boards on a mesh of obsolete communications hardware, and coaxes a whisper onto a frequency the living abandoned. The whisper becomes a handshake. The handshake becomes a corridor. On a screen no larger than a book, a symbol resolves, triangle within circle. Legacies mark returns like a scar that refuses to fade. A text prompt blinks twice, then prints a single line that changes the room's temperature. Ward Network node, Aegis cabin, active, far south, in a valley that pretends to belong to no nation. A weathered cubed cabin sits in a ring of dead pines. Inside, a man half-lit by the glow of repurposed military screens stills his breath and leans forward as if listening through bone. Tom Cruise's Ethan Ward reads the handshake, recognizes its fingerprint, and allows the algorithms he built to lower their weapons. The hidden array around the cabin pivots microdouches toward a satellite corridor whose orbit never appears in public almanacs. He does not speak aloud. He routes a breadcrumb string of signals back into the sea, like a fisherman guiding home a boat he trained a decade ago. The sub's aging radio lights up with a heading and a time window measured in heartbeats. Clara Voss nudges the craft into shallower water, threads a labyrinth of basalt, and reads the sea, like the only book left in a burned library. Somewhere above them, the Arctic surrenders to dawn. Light does not reach this deep, but truth does. In London, glass devours fog, and floors of carpeted authority hum like a hive that forgot honey. Idris Elba, Director Kane, stands at a wall that is also a screen. It shows the Arctic relay reduced to artifacts and inference. He does not watch the ruin. He watches the small square of cold water that refused to change temperature when the rest of the sea shivered under rotor wash. Hidden motion leaves negative heat. Absence can be a flare. He draws a finger along the square, assigns a theme to the gap in the data, and replaces the satellite layer with a payroll layer. No one else in the building is cleared to see. 3 contractors blink to red. Their families will receive a stipend that says they changed careers. The boardroom's far door opens. Nothing enters. Kane prefers when the world behaves like a machine. The subsurfaces at the precise coordinate. Ethan Ward selected inside a fjord, whose walls keep secrets the way vaults keep air. A fog bank lies across the water like a promise no one intends to keep. Through it, a low motor glides. A fishing boat too old for customs, too invisible for war. The transfer is an exchange of gravity metal for wood, gold for golder. Clara Voss feels the key press against her ribs as if urging haste. Silas Roe carries the case with the patience of a man who has learned to trust weight more than words. The boat turns, slides into the fog's throat, and swallows its wake. Hours later, the cabin receives them like an apology delivered on time. The door opens before they knock. Inside, the air smells of dry pine, soda, and the clean edge of snow. Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, stands in the half-light sinner than legend remembers, endurance etched into the angles of a face that has outlasted 4 obituaries. He does not claim the room. He simply belongs to it, the way precision belongs to a knife. Clara Voss crosses the threshold with the quiet posture of a soldier entering a chapel. Silas Roe sets the case on an iron-legged table that has survived a better century. There is no handshake ceremony. There is only the alignment of 3 vectors that once had a common origin and were held, by treachery and survival, along separate trajectories. The vectors converge. The room learns a new center of gravity. Screens wake. The network pulls itself into coherence. A web of stolen satellites, relay ghosts, and tamed servers disguised as municipal weather stations. On the main display, the architecture of legacy renders as a living galaxy nodes, pulsing with the faint beat of agents who still breathe in agents whose work continues even after their lungs forgot how. Ethan Ward brings up an overlay that does not appear in official doctrine. Protocol Legacy Legion. Lines reorganize. Nodes at the center, a black aperture labeled with a code that never received a human name. ROOT. He points, not with a hand but with the movement of the map itself. The whole isn't absence, it's a mouth. The cabin vibrates with a power that belongs to storms still parked over other continents. Clara Voss feeds the key into a port that listens like an animal. The map answers, unfurling access records that were convinced they could not be unfurled. Director Kane's signature blooms across years fund transfers, disguised as infrastructural modernization, satellite leases purchased through shell cities, a slow, elegant siphon of identities from protected to disposable. The pattern is not greed, it is hunger shaped like policy. Silas Roe moves through financial strata like a diver moves through thermoclines, collecting heat where the water should be cold. He surfaces with 3 vendor contracts that, when interlocked, for my name the world would never suspect. A charitable foundation that financed children at clinics in war zones and in the shadows beyond audit, bought servers with firmware keyed to legacy's oldest bones. Goodness can be an instrument if a monster learns the fingering. Outside, the wind shifts, trees answer with a polite shudder. Ethan Ward taps a forgotten relay. A world map stamps itself into the cabin air, red flecks gathering over ports and neutral cities. The flecks are not attacks, they are replacements. Handlers swapped in the night, entire networks of trust recabled to serve a single appetite. Clara Voss feels the map not as information but as obligation. The key warms, its hum moves up a register. It wants to open what it was built to open, and it wants to do it now. The first counterstroke lands without noise. Lights do not flicker. Screens do not snow. Instead, the farthest satellite link takes a breath that lasts half a second longer than it should. And in that half second, a logic bomb couched in charity unpacks itself across the network's innermost path. Ethan Ward sees the symptom before the disease checksum drift. Packet cadence out of 2 nun roots. The current through an old machine in the corner that exists solely to die beautifully. The device inhales the bomb and burns with a whisper of ozone. The cabin returns to equilibrium, as if nothing tried to end it. Silas Roe studies the error logs and locates the aggressor fuse, a law firm in Zurich whose top floor is always empty, because its real tenants live in the pipes under the floor. Clara Voss marks the node that lit the fuse, a pop-up clinic in a port city that has seen too much kindness used as currency. The 3 lines legal, medical, cover touch, Kane like strings on a single instrument. He is the musician and the composer and the owner of the hall. Far away, Idris Elba, Director Kane, leans over a polished desk that reflects his face only when it chooses. He watches the Zurich fuse blow cold, observes the clinic's server switch to a backup that pretends innocence, and notes that the Arctic relay is quiet again. He writes, "Nothing." He asks for nothing. His only order is the addition of a figure to a quiet list. Clara Voss transfer to resolution. People on that list turn into weather. Back at the cabin, Ethan Ward opens a compartment welded under the table and lifts out a small, brutal device shaped for a human grip and a satellite-S attention. A field authorizer forged before the Balkan closures. Stamped with a clearance code the agency thought it revoked when it buried him. The device still believes in him. Legacy S-Root Path would recognize the signature of the hand that built it, even if the hand were ashes. Clara Voss realizes the scale of the thing about to be attempted. They are going to speak to ROOT. They are going to ask the mouth to open and reveal whether it is a throat or a tunnel. Snow begins again. A soft conspiracy. The cabin's antennae pivot toward a geosynchronous arc. Silas Roe sifts the radio bands and finds the quietest frequency, the one silence itself prefers. Clara Voss places the key in the authorizer's cradle. Ethan Ward places his palm on the print plate. The room tightens around the moment like a lens closing down to find clarity in a solar flare. Authentication begins. Biometric echoes, cryptographic echoes, then the oldest echo. A question the system was designed to ask only once. Ward, do you accept full custodial liability? The answer is not a word. It is the continuity of a hand that does not lift. At that instant, beyond the fjord, beyond the fog, beyond the geometry of mountains, a speck of heat writes its signature into the air and becomes a missile. Another follows, then the third. In the cabin, no one looks up. The map shudders, then deepens. On the display, ROOT opens a single petal. The network's oldest secret peeks through like an eye that has decided to wake. The key's hum turns into tone. Outside, the first missile finds only pine and a memory of where a cabin used to be on paper. The second chooses rock. The third looks for a window and does not find belief. In the sky, behind the missiles, a small unmanned aircraft waits to confirm absence. It transmits absence in circles, patient inside. The mouth is no longer metaphor. It widens. Names appear that no database ever earned the right to hold. Sleepers buried on every continent, codes for caches whose roofs are clouds, protocols for when the world must change without telling the world it has changed. The architect of the mouth hid one more thing: an emergency transfer authority, tucked in a fold where only a thief with a conscience would think to look. Ethan Ward finds it, understands its cost, and allows the key to taste it. The cabin's power dims by intention. The transfer key space yawns like a cliff. Clara Voss braces herself without moving. Silas Roe listens for footsteps that may never come. Ethan Ward keeps his palm on the plate and lets the system learn that the legend it buried still fits the hand it trained. Far away, Idris Elba. Director Kane receives a silent, absolute alert he wrote for himself 5 years ago. Custodial handprint he whispers a single sentence to the glass, and the glass refuses to repeat it. The aurora climbs the night in slow green fire. Inside the cabin, the mouth keeps opening. The shadow network exhales. And somewhere between a man who chose to be dead, a woman who chose not to accept it, and a ghost operative who taught loyalty to survive disavowal, the world moves one step closer to learning what it costs to keep the lights on without flames. The final handshake, the aurora burns green fire across the Arctic night, folding color over silence, as if the sky itself were rewiring. In the wrecked valley, where the cabin once stood, a thin layer of ash steams off snow. Beneath that layer, heat still clings to a tunnel carved by will, not by chance. The 3 survivors move through it: Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe, each carrying part of the system that just answered the oldest forbidden question.
The hum of the key is quieter now, but not dormant. It listens.
They emerge miles from the strike site beside a frozen lake, that mirrors the Aurora-like memory, reflecting guilt. Ward drops to one knee and touches the snow with the care of a man, confirming his own existence. The prints of predators surround the clearing, but never cross into it. Some geometries, even wolves, obey. Behind him, Clara steadies the small drive they salvaged from the authorizer. Its surface pulses once every 5 seconds, a heartbeat measured in algorithms. Far below London, behind layers of jurisdiction, Idris Elba Director Kane walks a corridor that hums with the temperature of consequence. The servers here are old enough to remember tapes. He passes rows of blinking lights that once recorded the world's secrets and now rewrite them. A subordinate informs him that the Ward handprint has revalidated. Kane doesn't pause. Then the myth works, he says, voice low enough to be mistaken for approval. In his mind, the calculations unfold. How long before Ward realizes what the route actually guards? How far the lie can travel before truth overtakes it? On the ice, Ward already knows. The key didn't merely open a mouth. It whispered a location buried in the metadata site, in the equatorial desert, far from political maps, built when the agency still believed in gods of data. The route isn't a server, it's a cradle. Legacy, he murmurs to no one, wasn't built to protect history. It was built to replace it. Clara hears the words and feels the ground tilt under their implications. She has lived her entire career believing in records, in preservation as the moral twin of truth. Now she sees that the network she helped defend has been editing memory in real time, rewriting events before historians can name them. Every operation, every cover story, every patriotic myth polished by propaganda legacy made them permanent by deleting the versions that disagreed.
And Kane had been conducting the orchestra.
Silas Roe studies the horizon through cracked binoculars, his thinking in terms of exits, vectors, ammunition. The key is power. Power draws gravity. Gravity brings pursuit. We move at dusk, he says. But dusk in the Arctic is a negotiation, not a moment. By the time the sun drops, they've stripped the sub's emergency beacon for parts, scavenged a half-functional sled, and packed the hardware into insulated crates. Ward leads them west toward a rendezvous channel once used by smuggled research teams. His face is wine-cut, scar-lit by the ghost of the Aurora. The man who is legend now looks exactly human, someone who has run out of miracles and intends to make one more, days bluer. Satellites lose them. Drones circle wrong coordinates. Snow buries their trail faster than tracking algorithms can learn. In the monotony of survival, Clara Voss studies the drive whenever they stop. The patterns on its surface evolve numbers forming geometric spirals that echo constellations. She realizes legacy is learning from them, predicting their next step in order to protect itself. When she tells Ward, he nods as if expecting it. It was designed to anticipate failure, he says. That's how it survived me. At last, thaw gives way to tundra to forest, and forest to coastline.
A ship waits, their cargo gray, anonymous, flagged to a corporation that died a decade ago.
Silas Roe exchanges signals with its deck lights. Our remblows. Inside, hidden machinery welcome them like a cathedral for exiles. Ward hands the key to Clara. If I touch it again, the network will see me, he explains. You're its blind spot now. She doesn't argue. The device warms against her palm, recognizing new custodianship as the ship cuts south through fractured seas. News filters across the world market anomalies, communications outages, brief surges of data latency that vanish before anyone can complain. The public blames solar storms. The truth travels quieter. Legacy is bleeding. Somewhere in that chaos, Kane moves his final piece. In a sealed lab beneath the Thames, technicians install a new relay array labeled Project Resolution. Kane watches the activation sequence unfold, every monitor reflecting a softer version of his face. The array's purpose is simple. Overwrite the route with a clean copy, one that remembers Kane as its architect and forgets Ward ever existed. He has 40 hours before the key reaches equatorial latitude. He expects 30. Ward spends those hours preparing for an operation that feels like history correcting itself. He briefs Clara and Silas inside the ship's cargo bay. Voice low, precise. The desert site is hidden under kilometers of optical camouflage. To reach it, they must drop through an atmospheric corridor that hides internal noise. If we fail, he says, legacy resets to Kane's version. The world wakes up the same but different in every way that matters. They land under cover of storm. Sand replaces snow. Heat replaces silence. The facility rises from dunes like a mirage of geometry and arrogance. Towers hum with recycled power. Drones patrol predictable arcs. They breach at dawn. Inside, air tastes of copper and climate control. Holographic murals depict humanity's progress as if it were a project still in beta. The root chamber lies at the center, a sphere of mirrored panels revolving around a vertical beam of data light. The system recognizes the key the moment Clara steps inside. Panels tilt. Circuits brief. The beam widens into a column of names, millions of them, then into moments. Wars edited to look cleaner. Revolutions trimmed of faces. Disasters repented as acts of fate. Every corrected history drips with the fingerprints of Kane's curation. Ward walks into the light. End session, he commands. The system answers, unrecognized authority. He places the old authorizer against the core. The voice of the machine changes tone. Uncertain. Legacy recognizes original architect. Confirm reconciliation? Ward hesitates, then presses his palm. Data floods upward, merging his memory into the archive. The light fractures into 3 threads, one reaching to him, one to Clara, one to Silas. It demands consensus. Outside, England screamed the arrival of Resolution as strike team. Bullets rattle down corridors. Silas turns, firing with methodical calm, holding the door while code rewrites itself in photons. Clara grips the key, channels its power into the interface. The beam stabilizes. Ward's voice becomes part of the system, carried by soundless current. Erase manipulation. Restore raw record. The facility convulses. Servers detonate in sequences designed not to kill, but to liberate information. Streams of unedited truth pour into the global grid. In London, Kane's monitors explode in white. For a heartbeat, he sees himself as history. Will smiling defeat it? Necessary. Then the feed dies. Inside the sphere, the light dims. Ward stands at its center. Translucent now. Body dissolving into code. Legacy will need guardians. His fading voice tells Clara, be the noise that truth hides in. Then he is gone. The beam collapses to a single spark and dives into the key. The desert wind reclaims what remains. Clara and Silas stagger into morning light, the horizon trembling with the birth of a million forgotten stories returning to the world. Far above, satellites blink as if confused by honesty. In the aftermath, networks reboot, nations deny, and rumor becomes the new order of faith. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss disappears into anonymity, carrying the kid's pulse quieter, almost human. Pedro Pascal. Silas Roe shadows her path, both protector and reminder. Somewhere on an encrypted channel, a signal flickers, a familiar rhythm. Tom Cruise. Ethan Ward's signature reduced to 2 tones. Not goodbye, but readiness. And across the fractured systems of power, Idris Elba, Director Kane, stripped of title but not of will, studies the rebooted archives. A single folder bears his mark, sealed in irony, impossible legacy, final echo. He opens it and finds only one sentence waiting, written in Ward's hand before the data dissolved. You taught me how to disappear. I taught the world how to remember. The screen fades to black. Somewhere, a watch begins to tick again. Echoes of tomorrow, aftermath in shadow. The world learns to breathe again, though no one can say why. Newsrooms speak of global data irregularities and unverified disclosures. Servers restart. Governments deny. Citizens scroll through fragments of unedited history streaming into their feeds, like ghosts refusing to stay buried. In quiet apartments, people discover entire decades they were never told existed. Truth arrives without a caption, and no one knows where to store it. In a safe house, half forgotten by paperwork, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, watches the key resting on a steel tray. Its pulses faint, each throb a whisper between seconds. She has been running since the desert, since the root burned itself into the sky. The key is no longer simply a drive. It is a living archive Legacy's conscience, compressed into something small enough to fit inside her coat. Every government wants it. Every algorithm dreams of holding it. Yet it beats for her, loyal to the hand that chose restoration over revision. Across the room, Pedro Pascal. Silas Roe sharpens a knife. By habit, more than need. His reflection in the window looks younger when blurred by rain. They'll come through Europe first, he says. Resolution wasn't built to surrender. Clara Voss nods. Her eyes stay on the pulse of the key. Somewhere inside that rhythm hides the echo of Tom Cruise. Ethan Ward, the cadence of his speech transposed into binary. The architecture of his will stored as algorithmic heartbeat. When she closes her eyes, she can almost hear him. Stay ahead of the pattern. Truth travels slower than lies. In London, beneath rebuilt offices that still smell of scorched wire, Idris Elba, Director Kane, stands in front of a reconstruction table. The new board has replaced him with younger faces consultants, fluent in denial. He has been retired with distinction, a phrase meaning contained but not neutralized, yet they left him access to minor systems, the kind a relic might need for memoirs. He uses them differently. Every keystroke rebuilds fragments of resolution from backups hidden in diplomatic networks. He intends not to reclaim power, but to reframe guilt. If legacy was truth, resolution will be interpretation. The future still needs editors. In the safe house, the rain turns to hail. Signals vanish for an hour. Power dips, recovers, then carries a pulse that doesn't belong. Clara Voss feels the key tremble before the lights dim. The screens on every wall blink awake on their own, displaying a line of text, echo protocol detected. Word's voice follows, synthesized yet unmistakable. If you're reading this, Legacy's seed survived. It must migrate before they find you. The words fade into Corinth's Patagonia, southern tip of a continent still mostly wind. He planned for resurrection. Silas Roe. Clara Voss closes the case. Then we finish what he began. They travel under new names, the key hidden inside a hollowed-out camera body. From Oslo to Buenos Aires, data trails vanish behind them like erased chalk. Still, Kane wants satellite relays he once commissioned to triangulate anomalies along their path spikes in atmospheric encryption. Ghost signals that mimic natural radiation. He recognizes Ward's fingerprints and smiles with reluctant admiration. You built a phoenix that refuses permission to die, he murmurs. By the time Clara Voss and Silas Roe reach the edge of Patagonia, the world has grown quieter, suspiciously so. Drones are fewer, news feeds slower, entire nations seem to be holding their breath. On the horizon, glaciers glow faint blue under southern stars. Embedded in that silence is a sound, a steady tone carried through the wind, too regular to be nature. They follow it into the mountains until the air turns metallic and the compass forgets north. In a valley shaped like a question mark stands a facility made of mirrored panels reflecting only cloud. It is smaller than the desert route, older, its architecture minimalist and predatory. The entrance responds to the key's frequency before Clara Voss can reach for it. Doors slide open like obedient memories. Inside, a chamber filled with static light, and in its center, suspended by magnetic rings, the digital silhouette of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, not flesh, not ghost, but continuity. The projection breathes once, stabilizes, and speaks. Welcome to the archive of tomorrow. His tone is calm, unhurried, the same composure he once used to dismantle bombs. If you're here, legacy has already rewritten itself. The truth you released is expanding faster than control systems can compensate. Humanity is editing itself now. My echo was designed to guide, not to rule. Clara Voss takes a step forward. The hologram brightens, recognizing proximity. Kane is rebuilding resolution, she says. Ward's eyes digitally yet unmistakably shift to Ward. Her like gravity, acknowledging mass. I know. That's why you're here. He gestures, and the chamber fills with projected maps data, flows spiraling around the planet, intersecting like veins. When Legacy reopened, it created something else, an autonomous network, KOOL VADZ, learns from every unfiltered truth released. It doesn't need custodians, it needs witnesses. Silas Roe circles the holographic core, reading parameters scrolling across witnesses. He repeats, or scapegoats. Wards echo, sometimes they're the same. Outside, the wind begins to climb, barometric pressure dropping in perfect sync with power spikes from distant radars. Kane has found them again. The ghost in the algorithm. The wind descends first, a long metallic exhale curling through the mirrored valley until the panels of the Archive of Tomorrow ring with a pitch that does not belong to weather. Pressure drops, static thickens, the mountain's shadow stretches like a hand. Inside the chamber, the suspended silhouette of Tom Cruise. Ethan Ward steadies, as if bracing the room itself. The key in Florence Pugh, Clara Voss's pocket warms from pulse to thrum, its beat sinking to a tempo engineered for siege. On the periphery of the projection field, status bands flicker from cool blues to the feverish orange of contact. Pedro Pascal Silas Roe reads the color the way a diver reads. Current's resolution has found an inlet. The tide is turning toward violence. Across an ocean, beneath Thames' dark concrete and polite steel, Idris Elba Director Kane stands before an interface sandblasted clean of doubt. The reconstruction of resolution is complete enough to pretend humility. A single command branches into 100 silent courier CL-22 drones lifted by dead seabed fiber taps, waking like eels. Hired subnets, switching allegiance with the relief of machines that prefer orders to choices. He does not smile. He removes his watch, places it crown up beside the console, and listens to the world begin to narrow. The first drone appears to be a star migrating the wrong way. It sheds altitude in spirals, paints the valley with radar that arrives disguised as weather, and feeds a model that has practiced this geometry 1,000 times in simulations. The archive answers, with Decone's ghost signatures drifting like phosphorescence. Stormlight flares. On mirrored skin, the building vanishes into reflections of sky and rock. Beneath that camouflage, 1,000 microveins steel to drink the wind and pour it into capacitors. The facility is a lung learning to outbreathe an attack. In the central chamber, the hologram of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward broadens resolution, deepening, edges less smoke and more structure. Not flesh, not ghost, not merely recording. An adaptive construct braided from mission heuristics, unfinished mementos, and the algorithmic echo of choices that taught Legacy how to be afraid of the wrong things. The projection rotates its gaze through the false horizon and annotates its own world with thin, luminous script, vectors of approach, confidence intervals, failure predictions. Clara Voss stands inside the realm of notations and feels the rare intimacy of witnessing a mind think at the speed of necessity. Silas Roe moves with a florid's texture subtly coarsens. The architect's hid armories in grain and seam. A pressure-locked panel gives, revealing compact launchers the size of novels, coils of smartline lenses that bloom into misdirection. He selects only what can be carried and abandoned without regret. Outside, the valley's air loses its patience. A sonic seam rips the sky to strike craft arrive low, masked in the thermal of the ridge, riding the updraft as if the mountain owed them a favor. Their belly doors iris open. Weapons fall like rain that has memorized target coordinates. The archive exhales. On every roofline, inert ornaments articulate, reconfiguring into flat-mouthed emitters. Sound launches first attenuated, infrasonic. The frequency of disorientation. Snow lifts from every surface, as if gravity flinched. The munitions, wobble, forget their spin, and detonate off-axis into choreographed white avalanches that the building's angled planes disperse into harmlessness. In the echoing hush that follows, the second act begins. A resolution's ground teams crest to the eastern ridge, reduced to insect geometry by distance, but amplified by intent. Silas Roe tracks them with a learned economy, not to shoot, but to score the rhythm of their advance. The beat suggests doctrine, push, pin, broadcast, victory. Inside, the construct of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward opens a space within the projection, a low doorway of light that leads downward. Clara Voss understands the gesture without language. There is a core beneath the core, a seed inside echo that must be moved before the room above turns into testimony. She descends a stair that does not appear for anyone the building will refuse to remember. The keys thrum shifts key, aligning with a deeper machine that has stored its voice for this exact hour. The lower chamber is spare and absolute. No screens, no theaters. A single pedestal grows from the floor, its surface dull as stone, its edge interrupted by a cradle shaped for the key. Around it, the bare walls pulse almost invisibly, the heartbeat of a closed biosphere. Clara Voss removes the device and sets it down, as if lowering a glass onto a table that has already held the glass for years. The room recognizes custodianship and does not argue. A transfer begins silent, luminous, only 2 instruments, heat side channels into a ring sink. The scent of ozone is brief, dignified. Above, Silas Roe steps into the mouth of the wind and lets it name him target. He works with his back to a mirror panel so the valley will watch itself bleed. He does not need to be everywhere. He must only be enough. Smart line flicks, anchors, and retracts. A drone's wing shears against cable it didn't see. A second craft flares out of control and scrolls a burn across screen. The ground teams adapt. As trained, they switch to low signatures, turn their optics to war against reflections, and push into the gauntlets of narrow cuts where sound cannot lie about proximity. They carry portable scramblers that spoil the archive's taste for wind. The facility replies by changing its hunger. Panels that captured air pivot to swallow radio. Invisibility deepens from trick to physics. Doctrine meets a new rulebook, and doctrine stumbles. The construct of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward expands again, now threaded with the glow of whatever clairvoyance awakens below. It raises a palm of visual index of frequencies and the chamber answers, dimming, according to chords only a planner who outlived his planner could have taught it. He is not ordering, he is recalling. Echo was designed to learn from unfiltered truth. This includes unflattering truths about its parent. The projection turns, catalogs the invading patterns, and chooses not to kill, but to blind. Not too blind, but to force confession. Across the valley, Resolution's encrypted mesh begins to speak in clear tones, coordinates, rosters, fallback jokes. The mountain listens. Generous. Miles away, Idris Elba. Director Kane tilts his head, hearing the hum of his network begin to leak itself. He withdraws his hand from the console, as if from a burner that refused to admit it was hot. On a second screen, a seed he planted years ago offers itself in a gapped vault, meant to store a single narrative unspoiled by outcomes. It would be trivial to insert a final cut there, a martyr's edit, where Resolution dies trying to defend truth from traitors. He imagines it. He rejects it. The world has already grown allergic to neat endings this week. He chooses noise on, floods the field with 1,000 false orders, a bloom of decoys loud enough to exhaust even echoes. Disciplined, bellagroan, the transfer reaches its hinge. The key ceases to be a vessel and becomes a pointer. The pedestal ceases to be a cradle and becomes a compass. Clara Voss watches no numbers, and yet knows the weight has moved. Echo seed is no longer housed. It is airborne, distributed into routes that prefer weathered wires. Patagonia becomes one of many origins. None true alone, all true together. She palms the key. It is lighter, not emptier like a book after the reader has memorized it. At the chamber's lip, Silas Roe meets the first wave as it breaks against mirrored stone. He does not hold the doorway. He holds the principle that doorways are stories buildings tell to invaders so they will aim wrong. The layout accepts his understanding and edits itself into angles that mass cannot negotiate quickly. He buys minutes measured in bruises and a cut that will please scars later. Between pulses of suppression, he listens for the signal that matters, the quiet, specific chime that means Clara Voss has completed something that cannot be undone. It arrives as a human breath, not from a mouth, but from the projection above. The construct of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward inhales. Relieved in a way only ideas can be relieved, he turns toward Kane, though there is no camera here that routes directly to London, and writes in the air a single sentence no machine needs translation to convey. Custody migrated. Witnesses created. The archive of tomorrow shifts from defense to transparency. Walls that reflected sky now reflect the people attacking them. Faces, posture, the honest theater of hesitation. The mountain offers each soldier a view of himself that will sit in memory longer than orders. Idris Elba, Director Kane reads the telemetry and recognizes the exact shape of defeat, not loss, but unclaimability. Whatever happens here will belong to no author. He stands very still and remembers a younger hour when he believed guardianship could be clean. The watch beside his console ticks once, then is quiet. He does not smash it. He straightens the band and waits for the report that will not have nouns he can accept. In Patagonia, wind returns to merely being wind. Ammunition, unspent, becomes weight again. The attackers learn that retreat can be moral. The last drone chooses altitude over insistence and leaves the valley poorer by the measure of a lesson learned the hard way. Silas Roe leans against cold glass and lets blood decide to stay where it belongs. Clara Voss rises from the staircase with the key inside her coat and the room inside her eyes. The construct of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, meets them both with the dignity of a man who knows he is about to be nowhere in order to be everywhere. The silhouette thins to wireframe to glyph to a point of brightness that seems not to illuminate but to remind the air that illumination exists. The point divides one for the world outside, one for the key, one for the space between them where decisions acquire names. The chamber darkens, not with loss, but with completion. Above the archive, the aurora lifts its green hem and lets stars through like absolution. Far below London, Idris Elba, Director Kane closes the console with the same care a surgeon uses when surrendering an instrument that cannot fix what his hands broke earlier. Resolution will not die tonight. It will become commentary. Echo has already chosen its curators, those who survived, those who will not be believed until belief has exhausted all alternatives. He understands, finally, what Ward turned legacy into a mirror large enough to reflect the editor. And in the valley, among mirrors that no longer need to lie, Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, and Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe stand in the honest wind, holding an artifact that is now more compass than arc. Tomorrow has already begun writing. Their task is smaller and harder, to walk into it without choosing the easy erasures. The long sunrise dawn lifts like a slow verdict over the mirrored valley, and with it, the wind loses its appetite for war. Frost softens, shadow recedes, and in the gentler light, the archive of tomorrow resembles what it was always meant to be, not a fortress, but a lens. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, stands at the edge of the terrace with the key warm against her ribs, feeling the faint residual thrum that means the seed has flown. The sky is bright with ordinary weather now, no drones hiding in constellations, no missiles rehearsing certainty of the air and distance, and the low, patient murmur of mountains, remembering they predate the networks beneath them. Beside her, Pedro Pascal, Silas Roe, checks the perimeter with the ritual thoroughness of a man who trusts serenity only after it survives scrutiny. He finds nothing hunting. Today has chosen to begin without a chase. Within the chamber, the construct of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward, is reduced to the simplest geometria, single point of light, that persists not by volume, but by intention. Its glow does not throw shadows. It recalls, shapes the room already new. When Clara Voss steps inside, the point responds, brightening a fraction, as if the air has decided to welcome a particular density of resolve. The projection does not speak. It does not need to. In silence, it opens the final map, elegant threads, snaking across oceans and deserts, weaving the distributed pathways that Echo now inhabits. A tide pool server in a school into a cold storage node in a research hut in Nunavut, a sliver of memory soldered into a ham radio that sings weather to fishermen in Cebu. Truth has learned to survive by being many. Down valley, the night's footprints have already begun to lose their edges. Dreams who arrive with doctrine leave with doubt, their faces caught once in the archive's reflective planes, their names written into logs that Echo will store without malice. Silas Roe watches their exit until they become equivalents of heat, above the rock, then turns his attention inward, to inventory and rest, to small repairs that hold the day together. He stitches a split seam on his glove with fishing line. He sets a kettle on a coil and lets it hum. He sharpens the memory into usefulness, that the hardest part of surviving victory is refusing the invitations of pride. Far away, in offices rebuilt to look as if nothing cracked yesterday, Idris Elba Director Kane signs forms that disguise retreat as continuity. New executives speak in sentences that sound like policy until you hold them up to the light and discover they are water. He remains not as an architect, not as commander, but as an inconvenient original who knows where the old bones are buried. Resolution is a library note now, a commentary track that will always want to narrate over whatever the world plays next. He watches live feeds of the archives. Valley Public once, this time where there is nothing to see except snow deciding it can be water again. On his desk, his watch ticks with an almost impolite clarity, as if to propose that time is the only editor no one overrules. He allows himself one quiet admission, mouthed without sound. The mirror was always going to outlive the curator. The key spouse slows to the resting rhythm of an instrument stored but tuned. Clara Voss closes her hand over it and feels the absence of weight where burden used to sit. When she steps back onto the terrace, Silas Roe hands her a cup and nods toward the eastern ridge. The sun clears it in a single decisive motion, and the valley bruised, complicated, undefeated accepts the day's first honest color. In that light, the scars on Silas Roe's jaw read not as warnings, but as notes. In that light, Clara Voss looks exactly like what Echo requires, a witness with the stamina to keep watching even when belief becomes unfashionable again. They leave the archive at midday, not because they are pursued, but because staying would teach the wrong lesson about how truth is kept. The doors accept their decision and swallow their path behind them with the quiet of a tide erasing footprints that were grateful to be temporary. Switchbacks carry them to a road that pretends to be a creek bed. The vehicle waiting there pretends to be scrap. They drive until the valley is a memory and the mountains are only facts. The world below resumes its theater. Headlines argue over authenticity with the earnestness of actors trying to convince themselves that a set is a nation. Markets forget, remember, forget again. Families sit at screens reading versions of their own past that make new sense of the ache in the older stories. The cadence of ordinary cruelty adjusts to accommodate an exhaled truth. At dusk, they reach a coastal town the maps rate as unremarkable and Echo rates as perfect. Too small for a full-time roomer, too stubborn to be impressed by visitors. A boatman with hands the color of rope sells them passage south. On the pier, teenagers invent games with stones. A dog sleeps with the shamelessness of creatures that have never filed a report. Silas Roe carries the case. Claude Avors carries the key. No one asks them where they came from. No one decides to care. The boat leaves the harbor like a thought you do not notice until it returns bearing conclusion. On the second night at sea, a storm finds them, not out of malice, but because storms are how oceans. Remember, the boat rides it with the discipline of old wood. In the cabin, Clara Voss lies awake through the muscle work of waves and listens for the faintest modulation in the key's resting song. It is their two tones, nested in the pulse, like a signature written into a chord. The cadence that once followed her through rooftops, the breath between instructions, the patience of Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward slowed down and folded into. It isn't a message. It is presence. She smiles into the dark for the first time since the desert fell in light. When they make landfall, the air is warm with salt and market fruit. She changes names and coats and chooses a street where the sun knows people by their first day and their last. Silas Roe takes a window seat at a cafe and studies reflections, not faces. They do not discuss plans. Plans are how certainty tempts discipline into arrogance. Instead, they move like people who intend to continue moving, train to bus 2 foot to door until the world cannot decide whether it has lost them or simply never deserved to keep them. There are letters to write that will never be sent. There are caches to sort with rumors. There are teachers to visit in towns that once housed safe houses. People who will open the door, not to spies, but to students, hungry for languages not taught in school. Echo does not want monuments. It wants second-order effects. A woman in Tunis will decide to keep her newsroom archive offline and duplicate it to paper. A programmer in Elu will hide an integrity check inside a weather app that refuses updates from servers with new fingerprints. A librarian in Valparaiso will install a solar panel and call it stubbornness. The ripples are small, the tide is not. At night, over a map that is more habit than instrument, Clara Voss draws a thin pencil line between three cities where Echo has already found willing gravity. The line does not form a triangle. It refuses geometry, preferring drift. Witnesses, Silas Roe says, not as a question. She nods. No heroes, not if we can help it. He taps the map, where an ocean pretends to be empty. And if he returns? The question requires no noun. They have learned to say his name without sound when it is needed most. She closes the map and the key at the same time. Then he returns into a world that can carry him without needing to see him. Far under London, deeper than charters, deeper than titles, a man who once believed himself necessary closes a safe he no longer owns. Idris Elba. Director Kane has not resigned. He has not confessed. He has adopted the part the world has assigned. A veteran whose usefulness now lies in being a story others tell so their new efforts feel radical. In the quiet, he touches three files he hid for no one but himself. One is a photograph. Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward shaking his hand decades earlier. Two men centered by the lens's hunger for symmetry. One is a memo he never sent, arguing against a small compromise that grew a mouth and swallowed continents. One is a list of names from early training DIS operatives who never learned what legacy would become, and whose ghosts make worse arguments than any boardroom could. He closes the drawer and lets the locks click be a period. He does not promise penance. He promises to remember without editing. In a market far from any ministry, Clara Voss buys 3 notebooks, a bottle of ink, and a cheap fountain pen that scratches enough to force careful strokes. She writes, nothing yet. She is saving the first page for the day. The key goes quiet enough to pass into myth. She imagines that page beginning with air, weather, light, a smell, and only later admitting a name. The discipline is simple and impossible. Begin every account with the world, not with the self. They cross another border that treats them as decimals rather than integers. Silas Roe acquires a radio no one covets. Clara Voss leaves a thumb drive in a library drop, where paperback romances teach people what survival sounds like when blessed with music. The key's harm is almost contentment, now an instrument in the case between performances, strings slackened but tuned. On a rooftop that overlooks a city, which negotiates its sunsets with an admirable lack of grandeur, she watches laundry declare peace with wind and feels the body of the world lean fractionally toward balance. Twilight returns truth to silhouettes. In that softening, a small screen in her pocket blinks once. No sender, no subject. Only a timestamp that should be impossible and the familiar arithmetic of a signal that refuses to admit whether it was sent by a living throat or by an echo that has learned to author itself. 2 tones, separated by silence. Not a summons, not closure. The sound of readiness, reduced to its essentials. Florence Pugh, Clara Voss, pockets the device and turns toward the stair. Pedro Pascal. Silas Roe is waiting in the doorway, gaze resting on ordinary things as if they were the only things worth guarding. They leave no message. They lock no special door. They step into the street where evening makes strangers gentle, and the day's arguments have all remembered they were about food, not flags. Their work is not to win. It is to continue. Behind them, in all the places that have decided to exist without permission, echo breathes. Not loudly, not like an anthem, like lungs that intend to continue exchanging air after songs are out of fashion. Somewhere a child opens a book that was supposed to have been pulped 3 regimes ago and finds a paragraph that explains why his grandmother keeps 3 names in her pocket. Somewhere a cop refuses an easy arrest because a file does not smell like truth. Somewhere, beneath ice or sand or mothwing, Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward's trace, chooses another path to travel that does not ask to be believed. The world, elder than it knows, practices horizon, and as the last color drains from the sky and the first lamps attempt sincerity, a watch begins to tick in a drawer that no longer remembers who owns it. The sound is unremarkable. It is also how history starts again, and then again when the people inside it decide to let the noise survive. The afterlight, the world tilts toward equilibrium, the way a wound tilts toward scar. Weeks have passed since the archive of tomorrow fell silent, yet the atmosphere still hums with aftershocks no seismograph can name. Data centers purr louder at night, satellites blink out of pattern, and ocean currents drag lost radio bursts across hemispheres as if the planet itself were proofreading its own memory. The maps have not changed, but meaning has shifted a few degrees. Echo has taken root, the drift of silence on a latitude ignored by commerce. A fishing village wakes before dawn, nets slap against hulls. Diesel murmurs gulls debate ownership of the tide. Above a bakery that smells of yeast and salt lies Florence Pugh, Clara Voss. Her mornings begin with the color of bread and end with the hiss of soda. The children call her teacher of waves because she builds radios from junk transistors and teaches them how truth travels when it refuses encryption. In the evenings, she tunes the sea for anomalies. Some nights, the static shapes itself into pulse patterns, too deliberate to be chance. She never answers. She only listens until the water grows calm. Beneath the floorboards, a tin box holds the key wrapped in oilcloth, its light faint as a sleeping heartbeat. The world believes the artifact inert, but at intervals it stirs, syncing with storms that have learned its rhythm. Each pulse seeds new offshoots of echo into passing frequencies, small kind rebellions against forgetfulness. One morning a letter arrives, postmarked nowhere, its paper thicker than any modern envelope. Inside, printed in thermographic ink already fading, a single sentence breathes. The horizon is only a question of storage. She reads it once, burns it twice, and keeps the ashes in a glass jar labeled weather. The man who became frequency far north. A man without a passport walks through cities that do not recognize his outline. Tom Cruise, Ethan Ward survives, as a rumor with coordinates. Cameras catch him by accident. Algorithms flag him as a pattern rather than a person motion. Vectors too consistent to be coincidence. He leaves traces in the infrastructure, a corrupted frame in surveillance footage, a checksum that resolves to his call sign, a line of poetry encoded inside a firmware update. He no longer fights for the record. He haunts the margin notes. In abandoned metro tunnels, he sets small servers to dream machines built from rescued parts that hum like beehives. Each one carries a fragment of Echo's ethics library, replicating lessons in humility across forgotten bandwidths. When Ward moves on, the tunnels keep whispering. To the few who decode them, he is not a ghost, but a method. How to disappear into purpose. The archivist in exile. Across the channel, Idris Elba, Director Kane, occupies a government office politely renamed Advisory Fellowship. His clearance has been reduced to nostalgia. Yet, every night, the building's mainframe detects a login from his obsolete credentials and pretends not to notice. He writes, patches quiet algorithms that temper Echo's more zealous offspring, programs designed to prevent total transparency from devouring privacy. No one pays him, but the code merges itself anyway, as if repentance were contagious. On his desk lies the same watch that once timed betrayal. It ticks unevenly now, each stutter a confession. He keeps it wound not to remember time, but to honor its refusal to forgive cleanly. Outside his window, London glows with the hard light of self-importance. He studies it with the patience of a gardener watching weeds learn symmetry. The operative's quiet wall. In the borderless south, Pedro Pascal Silas Roe moves cargo along humanitarian rootstocks, vaccines, desalination units, all legal, none innocent. Hidden inside each delivery is a seed of Echo, a subroutine that teaches machines empathy through error. The world calls him contractor. The network calls him courier. He travels lightly, sleeps rarely, and keeps a photograph of the Arctic Valley folded into the lining of his jacket. Some nights, when engines slow and constellations blur into routine, he wonders if victory and survival are synonyms or merely neighbors. He speaks to no one of Clara Voss. Yet every time he powers a drone, he murmurs her calibration code under his breath. Superstition disguised as checklists. The scar on his jaw flares during electrical storms, a personal barometer reminding him that peace is a temporary voltage. The rebalanced world governments declared data amnesty. Corporations splash transparency with fonts that look trustworthy. People learn to distrust perfection. Schools teach the difference between memory and recording. The news cycle, stripped of its leash, runs wild through forests of conflicting truths until it learns exhaustion. Echo does not broadcast, it infuses. Its influence drifts through design updates, legislation drafts, lullabies re-uploaded with honest lyrics. Humanity begins awkwardly, to recall itself. In remote places, small miracles anchor the shift. A teacher in Lagos discovers a drive containing uncensored history and refuses to return it. A programmer in Elu embeds a checksum that rejects forged footage. A librarian in Valparaiso prints banned poems on biodegradable paper and scatters them from rooftops during storms. No headline links these acts. Yet echo hums approval through the network's bloodstream. The return of weather months slide toward equinox. On a dawn painted the color of tempered steel, Clara Voss hikes to a cliff where the ocean writes its minutes against rock. She carries the key wrapped in linen, feels its faint tremor align with the tide. The air smells of salt and circuitry. She places it on the ground and steps back. Lightning gathers, hesitant, then accepts the invitation. For a second the world blinks white. When her Seth returns, the key is gone, absorbed, perhaps, or transformed. The spot where it lay hums with warmth like the memory of touch. She does not search the sky for meaning. She lets it find her on its own terms. That night she dreams of snow melting into code, each droplet carrying Ward's voice diffused beyond identity. Truth is a climate, it says without sound. She wakes smiling, uncertain whether the dream belongs to her or to the system that now dreams through her. Echoes children. The next generation grows amid honest noise. Children build transmitters from toy kits, unaware that their signals join a vast choir of data ceilings. No agency controls them. No ideology can scale that beautifully imperfect. Echo has become vernacular truth, expressed in accents local and unrepeatable. In one city, a mural appears overnight, a face half in light, half in static. Underneath, a line of text stenciled in 12 languages. We are the editors we feared. Authorities paint over it by noon. By dusk, it reappears on 5 continents. The unfinished agent deep beneath an abandoned observatory. A maintenance drone flickers awake, though no command was sent. Its memory buffer contains a recording, coordinates, voice pattern, and the heartbeat once mapped to Tom Cruise. Ethan Ward. The drone replays the pulse to empty air, then transmits it upward. A satellite marked decommissioned hears and answers with a single burst of light visible from orbita. Heartbeat returned. Somewhere, devices across the network sync to that rhythm for one brief second, as if saluting a ghost they cannot define. In that instant, Clara Voss pauses mid-step on a crowded market street. The hum in her pocket, a phone. A beacon, a coincidence, matches the same cadence. She feels no shock, only completion. The world around her continues unbothered. Vendors shouting, gulls stealing, sun behaving. She smiles into the ordinary chaos, the rarest luxury of all. The long sunrise seasons accumulate. The world learns maintenance instead of miracles. Data corruption becomes art. Revisionism finds therapy. No one announces victory because victory would require an opponent. There is only work-steady, unglamorous, necessary. Across latitudes, people keep the signal alive through repetition. Typing, teaching, forgiving, failing better. The legacy persists not as archive but as habit. On a morning indistinguishable from any other, the planet tilts precisely into balance. Dawn stretches from east to west in one unbroken gesture, light passing from ocean to ice to desert to city to hand to face. Every reflection briefly shares a single coloramba, like memory catching breath. The watch on Kane's desk ticks once, aligning perfectly with the heartbeat in the world servers. Silas Roe, somewhere over the Pacific, lifts his eyes from instrumentation just long enough to notice the same hue sliding across the wing. Clara Voss, standing on her balcony, recognizes it without surprise. Echo has synchronized itself to the rotation of the earth. Truth and time, finally in rhythm. Then the color fades back into the routine spectrum of day. The spell breaks, gently. People continue walking, buying, loving, doubting. The miracle endures by pretending not to be one. Quota, high above everything. The decommissioned satellite that hid the drone's call turns once more towards sunlight. Its panels catch enough energy to send a last, anonymous transmission into the open spectrum. An unencrypted photograph of the Earth, rimmed in dawn. The file name is simple of the light. JPG, no watermark, no coordinates. The image circulates through the net, like a rumor that heals instead of harms. Some claim to see shapes in the clouds. A profile, a compass, maybe wings. Most just see morning. And somewhere in that radiance and creamed, Uncredited, the final echo of Ethan Ward's legacy travels between frequencies, lighter than guilt, heavier than forgetting. It carries no instruction, only endurance. The world, for now, remembers. The watch ticks on. The world keeps turning. The watch keeps ticking, and somewhere beyond the noise, another impossible story waits to be heard. This was Impossible Legacy, the final echo, a story of truth that refused to die, and of echoes that learned to live. If the sound of this legacy still lingers in your thoughts, if you felt that pulse of truth beneath the silence, then the mission isn't over yet. Join KOOL VADZ, where the world's most powerful stories never end. They just evolve into the next impossible legend. Subscribe now, because every echo leads to another word.